Hey, it's Sadesh Girdhari, and you are watching CloudStream live today, as every Friday it is. Today we're really lucky to have with us Ravi, and known Ravi for a long time, followed his career and his meteoric rise. He spent a lot of time, I'll say, in the trenches, doing the hard work of application building and deployments. And as we think about multi-cloud topics, as we have conversations around career growth, I thought really interesting to get sort of perspective from Ravi. And Ravi, I'll let you introduce yourself, and thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, so there's thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it and excited to be here on the live stream. So I'm Robbie Lockman. I run the evangelism team at a company called Harness. A little bit about Harness: we're a continuous delivery as a service, or now we're a software delivery as a service SaaS platform. So idea to production, we have you covered in a SaaS format, make it easy. And yeah, I reside in Atlanta, and that's about. At least at first word is about it for me. Yeah.
Well, I love Atlanta because I live here too. So one thing, as we were starting to talk about career growth, that I really thought was interesting was getting perspective from you. Where did you start? How did you start? Right? Like what was it that you were like, man, I am going to be a chief evangelist one day? Or what was the path that you kind of took and the perspective that you bring? Because I feel like a lot of folks that watch are interested in, how do I take that next step in their career, and where do I need to invest in myself, or where do I need to go talk to somebody in my company to figure out what's next for my career?
Yeah, absolutely. I can answer that in two parts. I can answer it for when I made the transition into evangelism. I'll just talk about my career kind of in general. So I'll be tactical and strategic. So the tactical portion of it, I was a principal sales engineer for a distributed systems company. So I used to work for a company called Mesosphere, or just D2IQ now. So I really like distributed systems. The irony of it is that I wanted to be like a chief architect or chief engineer, and the only thing holding me back was like people knowing my brand. So if you were to Google my name, I really like fried chicken. So if you Google Robbie Lockman, like the first thing that would come up would be like me, or like in some fried chicken form, which is true. Like I use my real name. I'm not ashamed to not talk about chicken. And so when they're looking at like, okay, the difference between you as a principal, as you as a chief, you really need to have more of a brand. I was like, well, I'm literally stuck in day-to-day selling activity. I can't, dedicate time. And then finally, someone told me, well, you know what? If you switch to an evangelism role or developer advocacy role, it's going to be your name attached to everything. And so like your chicken ranking will eventually just go down. And so I took that person's advice. I became a developer advocate / evangelist that when I go talk at a conference, if I go talk at, at this webinar, it's my name is attached to it. I was also told I like to talk, right? So one thing I really enjoyed was the evangelistic sales cycle. Like I like preaching about the problem. Like this is a new problem, and that's why I did very good at when I was at my time at Red Hat or my time at Mesosphere. I did really well because I was always loving to the evangelistic sales cycle. So now I just focus on pure evangelism. I've been doing it for a couple of years. I've gotten, I would say, a little bit better. And so now I have a team here at my current employer. Just building out that discipline domain, just moving the craft forward. It's really exciting.
Nice. And, as you think about the skills required there, I think one of the hardest things, if you're a developer, administrator, an engineer, any of these technical fields, right, is when you're building a brand, there are a couple of attributes, right? And I feel like personality comes into play there. But really, one thing that has captivated me when you tell your stories are they're really relatable. We've all kind of been through a technical experience where we're like, hey, it was great staying up to midnight and praying that this thing worked, but let's not ever have to do that again, right? Or I also thought, the way that you bring sort of I'll call it a rudimentary explanation, right? You're not talking over the heads of of team members that may be new to technologies like Kubernetes, serverless, et cetera, you're talking about, hey, here's how it is actually deployed. Here's some of those limitations and complexities, and here's what you need to be aware of. And so I think what would be nice to kind of understand a little bit more is those personal attributes that help you transition away from, hey, let me tell you how you can implement the software and then please go buy it, towards, hey, let me help you and your organization succeed in your path towards building your business, optimizing your operations, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like that's a really interesting area as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one part greed and one part like educating people. So I figured out over the years, there's like this German word called like learner. I'm gonna mess up the word, but like I learn by teaching, right? So like the learner method, and so I struggle a lot, like I constantly, like in my career and like in my academic career, my freshman career, like there's been lots of those midnight nights,
Yeah.
or just I just take a long time to figure stuff out and to learn stuff. And so it's how I really enjoy learning is actually just teaching people what I just learned. For example, like when I was in the early days of being a software engineer, I actually liked writing documentation because like I would forget if I didn't write it down, right? Like, oh, this is like how we wire up our Spring authentication services. This is how we're leveraging, Spring Cloud. Like this is how we're leveraging, how we're deploying the application. Now, that's always would usually be the most complex step. But like, hey, this is how you actually deploy your changes into production. I would take lots of screenshots. I'm like, hey, I will hand it to somebody and they can follow all the mistakes I made or step by step. And I've always put little caveats at the end, like troubleshooting. Like this is how I came to this conclusion. Like show my work. And I just enjoy doing that. Fast forward to today, I kind of do that for a living, but I also tell the story, right? Saying, hey, there's a little bit more of a relatable story that you can have. Let me give you the cheat sheet. Don't struggle. I struggled. I don't want you to struggle. Here, just you can use the cheat sheet as much or as little as you need. I get to come to your own conclusion or come to your own.
And what's interesting? I look back those days. Those IBM days back, this might be dating myself, like a couple of decades ago. They used to write these incredible books. I forget what they're called. They were like
red books.
Yeah, those things. And they, so that's it. That is actually interesting. So I feel like that is a great philosophy to call out, right? Like being able to document what you're doing to the extent that somebody might want to read or learn from that material. That's a super call out. I think the other thing that I thought was really interesting as we started talking about kind of your career path is that you noticed some things when you would move into different environments, and I liked that kind of observation a lot, right? Because essentially, we as enterprise technology purveyors, as folks who have to constantly deal with different operating environments, we all have to go through this. Well, how are we going to set up this environment, right? And what do we have to do here? And sure, I think it'd be great if you could share a little bit about that, because I thought that was a great insight overall. Yeah,
for sure. And so one of the things I'm really passionate about is like engineering efficiency, and so I just goes back to like helping people achieve their goals. Like I struggled, and one point of contention I had, and I used to be really embarrassed about it, and I used to get a lot of angst, and then finally turned into I accepted it because I knew it was going to happen, and so I was like kind of ice cold about it. Was in my career, most of my career, I focused on the Java stack or JEE. So I started out in the early days JEE. I kind of read the wave all the way through JBoss and Red Hat. And I used to work for IBM, ironically, before they were Red Hat was part of them, and so like. I just rode the Java pony for a while. And so every single team, I must have been on probably 12 or 13 separate code developing and feature developing teams in my career, is that we deployed differently every single time, right? Like I took my Java knowledge or pattern knowledge or how I went about solving certain problems, like a little bit additive team to team. It was fun to explore, new functional challenges, but it was annoying how to deploy it. I used to avoid it until, I was more like senior and principal. I would just hide and be like, oh, that's someone else's job to deploy it. I wrote the feature. I'll be gone on another team before they even figure it out. But yeah, it's actually, I used to struggle to deploy, right? Like it was hard. I struggled with the build, and I certainly very much so struggled during the deployment times. It was, you spent 2 or 3 days. I would always not look forward to it. Bring everybody together and, just turn things on and off. I'm like, I don't understand why they do this. Why am I here at 2 a.m? And I happen to want, now that 2 a.m. turned into business hours as things got faster and more convention. But every single team that I've been on, we deployed software differently. There was nothing I can take how we did things team to team, right? And there's a reason for that. Software is a team sport. It's a culmination of ideas before your time, during your time, and live on most of the time after your time, right? So you're navigating very bespoke decisions, and it culminates into your deployment, and that is why your deployments are bespoke, and no two teams will deploy the same. And so that's what I focus solely on here at Harness. I've actually written a few pieces on the last frontier of standardization. I was fairly lucky. Hacker Noon picked it up and they liked it. That your deployments are lacking standardization. So how do you standardize them?
Yeah. And I think, what's nice is I think, just here's a comment from LinkedIn, right? Like, I think people really empathize with that, right? Like that's great. And, one of the things that I thought about as you were talking about this, right, is just as difficult as it is for dev teams who are working on this, operations teams face so much more complexity. And I think that, you talked to me a little bit about developer experience, and I was like, well, developer experience is important, and so is ops experience, right? Like these are two things that are so intricately intertwined in terms of how organizations are putting together whatever their deployment patterns might be for their large production apps. And I recall there were a couple of points here that were important that I thought about. One, the complexity of walking into an organization and having to be responsible for deploying software, and then it not being a common pattern, right? And then on top of that, most people don't get to walk into a greenfield organization and they're like, hey, this is how we're going to do deployments, right? Most of us have walked into large enterprise organizations and have applications that have existed for millennia, right? And so I thought, those were a couple of interesting places that we chatted about, and I was like, hey, these are really good points to bring up to the audience here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It all falls under the umbrella of engineering experience. So I have one of these. I have an iPhone. It's the consumerization of enterprise IT, right? We have an expectation as a consumer for things to be easy, and I'll make a crack on my sister here. And so it's as an engineer, there's this expectation that you're technical and that you can figure anything out. So this is why the experience is piss poor. It doesn't matter. You need to log into several systems. It doesn't matter. You're using more than one protocol. It doesn't matter. You need to SSH here, use kubectl apply here. This is YAML. This is JSON. This is Groovy. You'll figure it out, right? Because you're an engineer. No, it's not. It's the same rationale that I used to put my sister on Twitter and blast her, and someone I got interviewed by DevOps Institute. They're like, it's really funny how you talk about your sister. She will text me about her printer,
right?
And I put a screenshot of the iMessage up. I'm like, I don't know your printer. Call HP, or just reinstall the thing. Yeah, it's an ongoing saga with her printer. It still goes on. But there's an expectation that the engineers will figure it out, right?
Yeah.
They're smart, but it's toil. Why do you have to do that? And getting into the operation sides of things, it used to be going back to the Red Book. There used to be these Red Books. How exactly step by step? It's if you're flying an airplane and your airplane has trouble, it's like an operational manual. You kind of look through it, or a quick reference manual. There's less and less of that now on the operations side because the two sides are actually merging together. Being a software engineer, there's a lot of infrastructure emphasis on you now. Just full lifecycle developer, you're making infrastructure decisions. And the modern operations engineer or the modern system engineer is looking more like a software engineer. They have to iterate. Right? That's unheard of. A couple of years ago, because you only deal in production, there's no iteration. But now with software-defined, every infrastructure's code, software-defined everything, you have the ability to be creative. and the
Yeah.
ability to iterate. And so they're looking like software engineers now, right? And so both sides are coming together, and this whole engineering experience has changed because a lot of times you're not going to get something right the first time. I've never gotten something right the first time ever.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I don't know who does that.
Well,
at least I don't.
Yeah.
And so it's an experience that you know that you have to iterate, and so you want to make it easy for everybody to iterate in a safe manner, and that is the common goal for modern engineering efficiency, ops side, dev side, anybody in between. So
yeah, no, I think I like a couple of the points you made there. First, the reduction of toil, right? Like, how are you in your job reducing toil, right? Which is effectively, it could be. I think one area we haven't even mentioned is the business here, because the business feels pain when you say, "Oh yeah, we'll get that out in 4 weeks," and they look at you and they're like, "Well, my P&L review is, hey, let's
today,
next week." Yeah, right. So I need the feature as soon as I can get it. And then, the other area here that's really difficult is the modernization, right? We in the technology practice areas, we use modernization as a general coverall for anything that is going to kind of go down the road of being improved. And I'm using my air quotes here, although you can't see them. And this is improvement sometimes adds complexity. I mean, a lot of times adds complexity. And this is another kind of a careful area that as tech pundits, sometimes we have to be really careful. Like, yes, we describe the pathway to Zen using Kubernetes, right? Yes, it is possible to refactor everything into microservices and make infrastructure immutable. The question is, does it benefit your business organization, your dev pipeline, your operational teams in a way that impacts the overall goals that you want, right? And I think that drives to value, which to me, I'm curious, like, as you think about the importance of developer experience and the value that you'd be driving, what are the areas there that you feel are most important for folks to know about or focus on as they go through that experience?
Yeah. I think what it kind of boils down to this fundamental is the ability to experiment.
Yeah.
It's something that I haven't done much until now as a software engineer. And even more so, it's kind of a newer way for operational engineers to start to experiment, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you this quintessential example. Like, businesses have been experimenting since the dawn of time, right? Hypothesis-based business decisions are common. Why does American Express lower the credit requirement for the Platinum card? Or my example I always like to use, where I live in the Southeast, Publix is a big grocer. Anytime there's like a hurricane, they move beer to the front of the store. That's the first thing you see. It's like, because they can sell, they have the data that people like to buy beer, so they want them in and out of the store quicker so more people can buy. But those are data-driven business decisions, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, if this business, they're having the same type of experimentation, but how do they get that into the actual features? And as a software engineer or as an engineer, I also want to experiment, right? I want to know how I did or how we did, but the common problem there is like blast radius. Like, if I experiment right now, I could take down the whole platform if I cared.
Right.
Like how do you limit that? And this is where like a lot of the investments in, let's say, like cloud native stuff like Kubernetes or like your load balancing stuff, or even this other concept called progressive delivery with like a feature flagging type of tool.
Right.
It allows you to like limit, like segment people and like have like more controlled experiments with a lower blast radius.
Yeah.
And so you can learn, hey, because we delivered XYZ feature, are we getting more conversion? Because we enabled this, are we getting XYZ results? And also you can test things quicker, like, are we getting more efficient because we can release quicker, right?
Yeah.
So there's these common success metrics. There's the particular DORA metrics that are like, deployment frequency and change failure rate. Like, are we making improvements in those type of things? And that's a lot of times, if you're able to experiment, you're able, like in school, the more data you get, the better driven decisions you have. So I see experimentation as one of the big pillars.
Yeah. What's nice about thinking about the ability to experiment, right? So a lot of times the reason you're experimenting is to improve feature velocity or delivery, right? Improve delivery to the organization. And, I think there's some cultural things there, right? I know lately there have been some startups that are like, hey, here's how you do blameless, right? Like,
I got blamed a lot. I
yeah.
mean, where was this blameless culture? Oh, an engineer did something. They literally say, Robbie, Jira did it. Like,
Yeah,
please.
I wish I had not been around for those the post incident reviews. Those were some painful days, and you know I think it is part of a cultural change though across ops and dev and you know apps etc. Right, that has to happen there for the experimentation because it's not pure. I mean, obviously it is somewhat technical, yes, but the limitation is if we introduce feature flags and A/B testing and we deploy to a smaller subset of users, right? Are you guys going to get upset about that, right? and I mean, it's part of the question that you have to be kind of aligned with your business on. And if they understand we are going to try it and it may work really well, but we got to try it first, and then you know they can kind of handle that risk. I think there's another conversation there about risk, right? Like, what is the risk appetite of the business, right? I assume that Bank of America is a little bit different than your average, I don't know, Kubernetes startup in terms of risk appetite, right?
They have a lot more at risk, you know, like I remember one of my previous employers, we were working on the check cashing application for Bank of America. And you know, when the first day on the project, the super nice guy like was just telling me like, hey, do you want to take a guess how much money we clear in our application a year? And I said some number. He's like, you're way off. It was $1 trillion that they cleared their check cashing application. $1 trillion. It's like the economy will stop, you know, for that much money, right? So I was like, trillion? Are you sure? Like he's like, yeah, it's a little more.
Wow.
The system. They're
yeah. You know, there's another area that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and you know, that was what changes have kind of affected developers during your career progression. And the reason I ask this question is because a lot of times we know what affects us personally, and I was kind of interested what you've seen overall as you kind of think through that.
Yeah, it's a great time to be an engineer. Like I remember earlier in my career, I felt like a mechanic. Like I felt like I worked at an Acura dealership and they would just swap me out. You know, if anything happened. This is only like 15 or 16 years ago. Like the big, what keeps me in the industry is that we're, you know, software engineers or infrastructure engineers. It doesn't matter. Engineers are viewed as a innovation center now, right? We're not just a cost center. I was constantly worried, you know, 10 years ago I was going to get outsourced. It's like, oh, they're going to find someone cheaper in another region. And you know, really, we have ways to impact. You know, we're the ones building the features. We have, or building the infrastructure. We're engineers are natural optimizers, right? We might have, you know, part of why this taking is 30 seconds. Like, as an engineer, you pick a job for two reasons. One reason is a domain, so you're gaining domain experience, and two, you're learning another technical stack. But both are valuable, right? Like it's not just I want to work for XYZ company because you're using like Node.js and Kafka and like so what? I want to work for them because they're solving a problem, and I want to help solve that problem. The technology stack, okay, I get paid a little bit more because I know Kafka, right? Or I know like some big data stuff, right? Okay, sure, whatever. But I want to help solve the problem. I'm passionate about the problem. I want to learn how they're solving, maybe they're impacting everybody. People sending photos that disappear, that sounds cool. We're helping, right? Like this is a neat problem to solve, right? And so I want to be able to impact people, have impacted their lives. That means a lot for me. And I want to input my value, but a lot of times you'll be handed a spec, like do not deviate from this. But now it's like it's a two-way street, like because of agile and like incremental features. Like the engineering teams are viewed as innovation centers, not cost centers. For most of some places, you might roll your eyes, like definitely going to get outsourced, but there's less of that, right? There's a lot more building of expertise. Especially in the DevOps space, you want employees, not contractors, doing this because you want it to last for time.
I think
that's the big thing.
It's interesting. Back in the old Pivotal days, we used to use the 5 S's. Speed, scalability, stability, those types of things to describe what ideal platform ops is like, right? And I almost like I empathize with that as the value of good engineering, right? The good engineering brings those five S's forward, and then I think it adds a D, which is durability, right? Like you're as you are evolving your code base, or as you're starting to decide where you're going to pivot your application, because all of a sudden you need to switch from on-premise delivery to click to purchase, right? Like these are the things that you want available overall, and I think part of the ethos is building an engineering team that can continue to deliver that. And I think first of all, thanks so much. And I'm gonna switch gears now, and we're gonna talk about, well, what happened this week in some interesting news, right? And first off, you did talk about an organization that is kind of faltering a little bit in terms of employees. And this week I have a lot of good friends who work over at Rackspace. I think they are experiencing some layoffs, and I look at this as we all have to work in tech. We all know that this is part of the cycles, but good engineering talent is always in demand. Smart people are always in demand, and I don't know if you guys are hiring over at your organization, but we certainly are over at ours. So
I have headcount on my. If you want to come work with me, I have a couple headcount on my team. So shameless self plug, please, friends, come join your friend Robbie. We can hang out, do great things. But yeah.
And similarly, VMware has so many great opportunities available and roles open. So know that that's happening. I think part of being a great engineer is being empathetic to what's happening in the industry. The other things that I saw, I don't know if you saw the earnings, and I was kind of like, wow, the cloud earnings came out for all of the major cloud providers, and Microsoft and Google, and I just like the runaway growth there is just, it's crazy for multi-cloud and other factors. There's just so much growth overall, and I'm curious, as you have to deal with a lot of kind of CI/CD, you must see these deployments that have to go different ways as well, right? That has to be a common area for you guys. But I'm curious what you think of this growth pattern, and kind of where you think that stuff's going.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it goes without saying, like the cloud is getting bigger and bigger, especially with the pandemic. A lot of people were pushed to working from home. So, the going meme is like, what caused your digital transformation? And like COVID-19 was like the leading reason. Like overnight, businesses had to adjust. That's the sad reality of it. Where I see a lot of the cloud growth, this gets into a little bit more of a personal opinion, is that when you think of the cloud, you think of infrastructure. Oh, I have a Google GCP machine or an EC2 machine out there, but that's not where they make their money. Those things are table stakes for the cloud vendors. They make their money on high margin services. And so what they want to do is make like, oh, come use Amazon SQS, or Amazon Managed Kafka. Don't worry about brokers and stuff. We'll help you. Or come use Amazon App Runner. We'll help you out from code to container. Or that's where they make their cash. Same thing with Google and Azure, right? Like they don't want the less compute you use, the less it costs them. But they can charge you for the control plane and the software because they're helping operationalize things. And once they get you sticky to that, oh, good job. The going joke is that Kubernetes is portable.
Yes.
But AWS IAM is not. So their authentication stuff is not. So you tell me,
I'm going to have to make a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Great insight, right? For all our folks out there that are like, well, that's interesting. Great. Identity is a key for successful, secure Kubernetes deployments for sure.
Yeah.
That's
may go where you want,
I think that's nice.
Yeah, and so this is like shows the importance of like it's still technically difficult to have like true portability. Shameless plug for Tanzu. I look up to them. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
you can achieve that, with Tanzu.
yeah.
So.
I think across the board, it is helpful to know when you can move something and when you cannot, because essentially you're sinking engineering talent into it, right? And should you need to make a pivot, this comes back to flexibility. When someone comes to you and says, "Hey, for business reason X, I want you to make move Y," you can't look around and be like, "Yeah, no, that's never going to happen. That is not the right way to deal with it." Seek to understand, well, why do you want to make that move? Like, let's figure it out. Oh, it's not cost, it's value. Okay, well, we are not seeing the value. So explain, like you have to be prepared for those things. And I think there was another, speaking about value, there was another, I call this a tactical article where Cloudflare obviously was talking about the egress fees, and you're talking about high margin, right? The highest margin of all has to be kind of these network services, right? Where, you're paying for moving data around essentially, right? Which it's a very, data in general is very strange in terms of how it's treated in the consumer market. If we have home internet connections, we don't want to hear about data caps, but over on the enterprise side, you got a taxi meter on every path, it seems, for moving data around. And I mean, for developers, this also introduces new burdens, because as a dev, you're like, oh, well, I made a great piece of software. And they're like, yeah, but, the egress cost is just killing us. And you're like, well, when was that part of the thing I was supposed to think about, right?
It's like, what is the egress cost?
Yeah.
I don't care. Good. More people are using it. Congrats.
Yeah, that's exactly
you paid
right.
the bill.
Yeah.
That's it's getting into like cost management. So like through my career, my old nemesis used to be the operations team. Forgive me if anybody was in ops. I used to do really silly things like drop IP tables, or like, I don't know what ports open them all. The application will figure it out. As I learned later in life, that is not the right thing to do. And so my old nemesis used to be the ops teams. As I progressed in my career, my new nemesis is a finance team. It's like, Robbie, you're you're like a quarter ahead in your spend. Like, what are you doing? It's like, yes. Yeah, it's like, and so this is the first organization I've been at that I actually have access to the billing console at AWS. I never knew how much things cost. I just didn't know, and now I have access to billing, and unlocking that, like the next frontier. Again, it goes back to us as engineers or natural optimizers. Like, I want more density. I want to get more. Like, I don't want to spend, like, clearly if I knew, how do I bill for cost optimization? That's something they don't teach you, right? Like it's how do you bill for that? How do you get more density? Like, you want to do these things, but it's based on the data that you know. I actually, another joke, sorry, AWS, like Papa AWS, but like I have a copy of our bill, and I can't explain where some of these services are. It's like, because there's no such thing as a free lunch. I get billed in every dimension, from networking to storage to data transfer, to just having a record in something, and then I guess I'm taxed, like, and plus the compute. So it's like, for the last like 6 or 7 months, I've been getting a $2 charge for an NAT gateway. I don't know where it is. It's like, what is this DNS record? Where did it come from? Who's using it?
Right.
It's like demo app that harness.io. I'm like, none of that doesn't go anywhere. Like, I can't resolve it. Well, I'm not gonna take it away because I don't know who owns it. It's like, starting to build for that stuff. Like, I believe VMware has a cloud health tool that kind of does that. We have a tool that does that too. Like, we have.
Yeah, and I think what's important here is, well, first of all, like, this has been a great conversation, because not only did you cover off on topics that are challenges for dev teams that ops teams may not know about, right? Now I'm going to have to, flip this around, have an ops team person come on and talk about some dev team. And, at some point we'll have a kumbaya and everybody will, enjoy a cup of coffee together. But essentially you also kind of worked through the complexity that both systems engineers, who might be developers, and operations and DevOps engineers are starting to have to deal with. Not only are you equivalent to keeping your SLA activity where it needs to be and delivering for the business, you've got financial management that you have to think about. You have throughput. You've got all of these complexities, and we're asking for more complex technologies to be deployed, right? Whether on premise or in the cloud. And these will have impacts on I think the career paths and trajectories, right? And I think at some point, you're going to have to figure out what the specializations are you'll focus on and which you'll be able to deploy on, because nobody's going to be a jack of all trades for that. Well, believe it or not, you've spent 30 minutes discussing career growth and topics of dev engineering, as well as covering off some great news this week. I have a couple of questions. I always like to, kind of let people kind of get to know who you are, that are a little bit more personal. I think first question, what's your favorite kind of cloud computing service that you use? So previous folks have said like Pandora or Peloton or et cetera, et cetera. Is there something that you use that depends on the clouds, quote unquote, that you absolutely love?
Yeah, my two favorite apps I use all the time, it's like Spotify. I listen to music like all day. And also, I finally splurged. I broke down. I signed up for YouTube Premium. I had like
I'm YouTube. I'm there.
It changed my life. Like the videos just start up like that. They start up with the highest quality, which I'm pretty sure I get prioritized QoS now. And there's no ads. I can fast forward, look back. It is revolutionized how I look at content. So,
yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're anything like me. You're watching a lot of demos, right? So
yeah, this is some
how
ads.
does that work? Okay, here we go. So that's cool. And then I always ask my guests as well. I found that a lot of them have passion projects. I call passion projects anything that you do that is outside of work. It may be inside of work. It's just stuff that you work on. What is your what's your orientation there? What are you doing when you're not having amazing discussions live in front of an audience? What do you?
I like to eat also, but that's it'll be a little bit half hour from now is lunchtime here. But I like to write.
Okay.
So like it actually pans out really well. Like my like big passion is traveling and eating.
Yeah.
So I just like to write about it. Like, hey, I've been here, here, and here. Like I never like on like a Yelp review. I don't do Yelp reviews. First of all, I'm like down knock anybody for like trying anything. Like it is more like going back to that learner experience. Like, hey, I just came back from Singapore. I wish I knew I had to bring a pen when I landed because I forgot how to write. I was like, hey, I need to fill out this customs declaration, or like, I actually need to know where the hotel's at, like stuff like that.
Right.
I put those like I wish I had cash at this point because I was trying to pay with Apple Pay and they looked at me like, why are you handing me the phone? Like little stuff like that. Like I always like to do in my personal travel blog that I have. So
nice. Well, I think it's always important as we talk to folks who are in industry, who are practitioners, that we focus on not only are you great at sort of building your career, but also the things that help you along the way that may be outside of everybody's viewpoint, right? And so thanks again for joining. Hopefully we get you back sometime soon, and enjoy travel when it opens back up. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ish. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.